My sister, Isabelle, promised me co-ownership of the boutique I built with my savings and expertise. Once it was a success, she fired me. She and her boyfriend thought they had won, but they forgot about the legal documents I found in my old desk drawer, giving me the one thing they couldn't take: the brand itself. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The scent of champagne and success was thick in the air. It mingled with the delicate perfume of the new leather handbags that had just arrived and the faint, clean smell of the lilies I de-arranged on the counter that morning. Our boutique, Elysian Threads, was having its best month on record. The numbers I'd just finished crunching on the spreadsheet glowed with promise, a testament to 2 years of relentless, all-consuming work. I leaned back in my worn-out office chair, allowing myself a small, weary smile. Every sacrificed weekend, every sleepless night spent optimizing our website, every ounce of my life savings, it was all finally paying off. The door to the small back office creaked open. It was my sister, Isabelle, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the showroom. She was the artist, the visionary. Her designs were the soul of this place, while I was its bones and circulatory system. "Evie," she said, her voice a little too bright, "can you come out to the front for a minute? Marcus and I need to chat with you about something." Marcus, my smile tightened. Marcus was Izzy's boyfriend of the last 6 months, a man who dressed in suits that cost more than my rent and whose smile never quite reached his eyes. He called himself a business consultant, a title as vague and polished as he was. "Sure," I said, closing my laptop. "Is everything okay?" "Everything's great," she chirped, turning back toward the showroom. I followed her out of the cramped office, my mind racing through possibilities. Maybe they wanted to discuss expanding, opening a second location. The numbers supported it. Maybe they were finally ready to formalize our partnership agreement, the one we'd been operating on with a handshake and a sisterly promise since day one. A wave of relief washed over me at the thought. It was long overdue. They were waiting for me near the front counter, standing together in a way that felt less like a couple and more like a united front. The boutique was empty of customers, the door flipped to closed for the evening. Marcus stood with his hands clasped behind his back, rocking slightly on his heels. Izzy stood beside him, her arms crossed, refusing to meet my gaze. The celebratory atmosphere I'd felt moments ago evaporated, replaced by a cold, prickling dread. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Izzy took a deep breath, the kind you take before delivering bad news. "Evelyn, we've been looking at the company's trajectory and, well, we're entering a new phase of growth." "I know," I said, a genuine smile returning to my face. "I just ran the quarterly reports. We're exceeding all our projections. It's amazing, Izzy." "It is," Marcus interjected, his voice smooth as silk. "And that's why we've had to make some difficult strategic decisions. As we scale, we need to streamline our operations, optimize our expenditures." He was using his consultant speak, a word salad designed to sound important while saying nothing. I looked at my sister, waiting for the translation. "What he means," Izzy said, finally looking at me, her expression unreadable, "is that we're restructuring the staffing arrangements." My heart began to beat a little faster. "Okay, what does that mean?" "It means," she said, her voice flat and rehearsed, "that we're letting you go." The words hung in the air, nonsensical and unreal. I think I laughed, a short, sharp puff of air. "Letting me go? Izzy, what are you talking about? This is our business. You can't fire a co-owner." Marcus cleared his throat. "That's the core of the misunderstanding, Evelyn. You were never an owner. You were an employee, a very dedicated one to be sure, but an employee nonetheless." The floor seemed to tilt beneath my feet. I stared at my sister, my older sister who I had idolized, trusted, and sacrificed everything for. I searched her face for a hint of a joke, a sign of a terrible misunderstanding. I found nothing but a cold, hard wall of resolve. "Izzy, tell him he's wrong," I pleaded, my voice cracking. Tell him about our promise, about my savings, about quitting my job. We built this together. 50-50, you said, always. She had the grace to flinch at the memory of her own words, but her resolve didn't crumble. I know you put in a lot of hard work, Evie, and we're grateful. We've prepared a severance package for you to acknowledge your contributions. She slid a crisp white envelope across the polished countertop. My eyes burned with tears I refused to let fall. A severance package. As if I were a stranger, a line item on a budget to be cut. 2 years of my life, my entire financial future, reduced to a single envelope. I looked from Izzy's shuttered face to Marcus's smug, placid expression, and I understood. This was his doing. He had seen our success, whispered in my sister's ear, and convinced her to cut me out so they could have it all. He was a predator, and he had turned my sister into one, too. I didn't touch the envelope. I couldn't. My hands were shaking too badly. I felt a profound numbness spreading through me, a chilling void where just minutes before there had been pride and joy. I had given up a career, security, and every spare dollar I had for a dream. Not just my dream, but our dream. And with a few callous, rehearsed sentences, my own sister had stolen it from me. I see, I said, the words feeling like shards of glass in my throat. I turned and walked toward the door, my movements stiff and robotic. I could feel their eyes on my back. Evelyn, wait, Izzy called out, a flicker of her old self in her voice. I stopped but didn't turn around. Your personal items from the office, you should take them now. It was the final, brutal twist of the knife. Not just fired, but exiled. Erased from the place I had helped create in a matter of minutes. The shock was so profound it felt physical, a hollow ache deep in my chest. The financial ruin was terrifying, but it was a distant storm cloud. The immediate, suffocating pain was the betrayal. It was the realization that the person I trusted most in the world saw me not as her partner, not as her sister, but as an obstacle to be removed. The betrayal was so much worse than the business itself. Walking out of Elysian Threads that night was like stepping out of my own life. The familiar weight of the keys in my hand felt foreign, the click of the lock behind me an act of finality I wasn't prepared for. I carried a small cardboard box containing the few personal items I'd kept in the office. A framed photo of Izzy and me from when we were kids, a chipped coffee mug, and a stack of notebooks filled with marketing strategies and campaign ideas. The box felt pathetically light, a meager representation of 2 years of my soul. I drove home in a daze, the city lights smearing across my windshield. My apartment, a small one-bedroom I deliberately kept to pour more money into the boutique, felt oppressively quiet. It was supposed to be a temporary sacrifice, a stepping stone. Now it just felt like a cage. I dropped the box on the kitchen table and sank onto the couch, the adrenaline of the initial shock giving way to a bone-deep exhaustion. The first few days were a blur of disbelief. I'd wake up thinking it was all a horrible nightmare, only to have the crushing reality settle in again. I replayed that final conversation over and over, dissecting every word, every glance. Izzy's rehearsed speech. Marcus's triumphant smirk. They had planned it. This wasn't a sudden decision, it was a calculated execution. My phone buzzed intermittently with texts from mutual friends asking why I hadn't been at the shop. I ignored them, unable to form the words to explain what had happened. How do you tell people your own sister has orchestrated the most profound betrayal of your life? A week after the firing, a tense phone call shattered my self-imposed isolation. It was Izzy. Evie, you need to come get the rest of your things, she said, her voice devoid of warmth. I need the office space cleared out. The rest of my things, I asked, confused. I took everything that night. No, the old desk. The one we had in storage. It's still in the back room with some of your old files in it. We're getting new furniture delivered, and it needs to be gone by tomorrow. The old desk. It was a cheap, second-hand piece we'd bought in the very beginning, replaced months ago when we could finally afford better. I had completely forgotten about it. The mention of it sent a pang through my chest. It was from a time when we were a team, united against the world, fueled by cheap coffee and a shared dream. Fine, I mumbled. I'll come by after closing. Don't, she said quickly. Just come in the morning. I'll leave the back door unlocked for you. I don't want this to be a scene, Evelyn. She didn't want a scene. She didn't want to face me. She wanted me to scurry in and out like a thief, collecting the last remnants of my former life while she was safely out of sight. The cowardice of it was staggering. The next morning, I let myself into the alley behind the boutique. The back door was, as promised, unlocked. The shop was dark and silent. I walked through the stockroom, past racks of beautiful clothes I had helped source and price, and into the small office. There, pushed into a corner, was the old wooden desk. It was covered in a thin layer of dust. I knelt and pulled open the drawers. They were mostly empty, except for a few stray paper clips and dried-up pens. But in the bottom drawer, tucked away at the back, was a thick file folder. It was unlabeled. My fingers hesitated for a moment before I pulled it out. I sat on the cold floor and opened it. Inside was a chaotic collection of papers from our first few months of operation: initial business plans, vendor contact lists, and scribbled notes from late-night brainstorming sessions. It was a time capsule of our initial partnership. A wave of sorrow washed over me. This was proof of what we'd been, a stark contrast to what we'd become. As I sifted through the mess of papers, my fingers brushed against a set of more official-looking documents stapled together. I pulled them out. The heading at the top read, Trademark Application and Certificate of Registration. My breath hitched. I scanned the document, my eyes widening as I read the details. The name, Elysian Threads. The logo we had designed together. And at the bottom, listed as the sole owner and applicant, was my name, Evelyn Reed. The memory came flooding back in a dizzying rush. It was from the first week, a blur of panic and excitement. Izzy was frantically sewing samples for our first photo shoot, and I was trying to build our entire legal and digital foundation from scratch. To secure our brand before we launched, I had gone online and, using my personal credit card, registered the trademark, the website domain, and all the social media handles. It was meant to be a temporary measure, a placeholder under my personal name until we had the money to hire a lawyer and form a proper LLC. In the whirlwind that followed, with the launch and the desperate struggle to stay afloat, we had simply forgotten. Later, when Marcus came on the scene and helped Izzy set up the formal business structure, he must have just assumed the name was free to use. He never checked. And Izzy, the creative who hated paperwork, had no idea. I stared at the certificate in my hands, the official seal glinting in the dim light. A slow, cold wave of clarity washed through me, displacing the grief and shock. They had called me an employee. They had dismissed my contributions. They had taken my money and my work and cast me aside. But in their rush to erase me, they had forgotten one crucial thing. They had forgotten about the paperwork. And in their arrogance, they had overlooked the fact that I didn't just help build the boutique. According to the United States Patent and Trademark Office, I owned the very name on the door. 2 years ago, my life was a picture of stability. I was a marketing manager at a respectable tech firm, earning a comfortable salary with benefits and a clear path for advancement. I was good at my job. I knew how to analyze data, build a brand narrative, and connect with a target audience. It was predictable, secure, and profoundly uninspiring. My days were spent in meetings about optimizing click-through rates and increasing quarterly engagement. A part of me felt like a well-oiled cog in a machine I didn't care about. That's when Isabelle came to me with a dream. She spread her sketchbooks across my small dining table, the pages alive with elegant designs and swatches of luxurious fabrics. Izzy had always been the artist, the one with an innate sense of style and beauty. She had a vision for a boutique, a curated space that wasn't just a store, but an experience. She called it Elysian Threads. "I can't do it without you, Evie," she'd said, her eyes shining with an almost feverish passion. "I have the designs, the vision, but you have the head for business. You know how to build something, how to make people pay attention. We'd be the perfect team." I was hesitant. It meant leaving behind everything I had built. It meant risk, uncertainty, and a very real possibility of failure. "We'll be partners," she pressed, sensing my hesitation. She grabbed my hands, her grip tight with conviction. 50-50, always, you and me against the world, just like when we were kids. That was what sold me. The promise of partnership, of building something real and tangible with my sister, the one person I thought I could trust implicitly. The idea of pouring my skills into our own creation instead of some faceless corporation was intoxicating. So, I said yes. I cashed in the 401k my company had matched, drained my personal savings account, and handed in my resignation. The first year was a grueling, exhilarating blur. We worked out of my apartment, which was perpetually covered in fabric scraps and shipping boxes. I poured every cent of my savings, nearly $60,000, into getting us off the ground, paying for inventory, legal fees, and the deposit on our retail space. While Izzy focused on design and sourcing, I became a one-woman operations team. I spent weeks teaching myself how to code so I could build our e-com website from scratch. I photographed every single item, wrote every product description, and single-handedly built our social media presence from 0 to 10,000 followers in 6 months. I negotiated with vendors, managed the payroll, balanced the books, and painted the walls of the boutique myself, late into the night. I wasn't just the co-founder. I was the marketer, the web developer, the accountant, and the janitor. Izzy was the soul of the business, but I was its heart, pumping blood to every extremity to keep it alive. And I did it all without taking a salary, reinvesting everything back into the business, living off the last of my savings. For a while, it was perfect. We were a team, celebrating every small victory and supporting each other through every setback. The boutique started to gain traction, getting mentions in local blogs and building a loyal customer base. We were finally making a profit. Then, about 6 months ago, Marcus entered the picture. Izzy met him at some networking event, and she was instantly smitten. He was handsome, charming, and endlessly complimentary of her talent. He called himself a consultant who helped creative businesses scale. To me, he felt like a wolf in sheep's clothing. His presence subtly shifted the dynamic between us. He and Izzy would have quiet dinners where they'd talk big-picture strategy. When I'd join, the conversation would halt. He started referring to my work as the back-office stuff. He'd look over my financial reports with a condescending air, offering unsolicited advice that undermined my decisions. "You know, Evelyn," he said to me once, glancing at a marketing budget I'd prepared, "you have to spend money to make money. Your approach is a bit risk-averse." This from a man who had invested nothing. He encouraged Izzy to think of herself not as a partner, but as the brand. My role in his narrative was purely supportive, easily replaceable. Izzy, high on the success and flattered by his attention, started to believe him. Our conversations became less collaborative. She'd announce decisions she and Marcus had made instead of discussing ideas with me. She was pulling away, and he was the one guiding her. The final straw should have been when he advised her on formalizing the business into an LLC. "It's just a formality to protect your assets, Izzy," he'd said smoothly. "I can handle the paperwork." I was so busy managing a huge holiday sale that I barely had time to think about it. I trusted my sister to do the right thing, to ensure our original 50-50 agreement was finally put on paper. I never saw the documents. It never even occurred to me to ask. The thought that Izzy would deliberately exclude me was so monstrous, so contrary to everything I believed about her, that it simply didn't enter my mind as a possibility. Now, sitting on the floor of the empty office with the trademark certificate in my hand, I saw the full picture with sickening clarity. Marcus wasn't just a bad influence, he was a predator. He had identified Izzy's ambition and her creative ego as weaknesses to be exploited. He had systematically driven a wedge between us and convinced her that I, the sister who had sacrificed everything, was disposable. He had helped her steal my dream, and she had let him. The days following my discovery in the back office were a strange mix of cold fury and sharp, calculating focus. The numb shock had receded, replaced by a surge of adrenaline. For the first time since I'd walked out of the boutique, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a strategist. I had spent 2 years building a brand, and now I was going to use those same skills to reclaim my life. I went home and spread the documents from the old file folder across my kitchen table. The trademark certificate was the star player, but the other papers were a powerful supporting cast. Initial bank statements showing the $60,000 transfer from my savings account, email chains with vendors where I acted as the primary business contact, early drafts of the business plan written in my handwriting. It was a mountain of evidence, a detailed history of my integral role in the company's creation. My first call was to a lawyer. I didn't want a family friend, I wanted a shark. I spent an entire morning researching intellectual property and business litigation firms in the city. I found a woman named Ms. Albright, a partner at a prestigious firm with a reputation for being meticulous and unshakable. When I met her in her sleek downtown office, I was a bundle of nerves. But as I laid out the story and the documents, her calm, professional demeanor was incredibly reassuring. She listened intently, her eyes scanning each page I pushed across her large mahogany desk. She asked sharp, pointed questions, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and steepled her fingers, looking at me over the top of her glasses. "Well, Miss Reed," she began, her voice even, "this is quite a situation. Your sister and her partner have made a series of very foolish mistakes." A wave of relief so intense, it almost made me dizzy washed over me. "The trademark registration is ironclad," she continued, tapping the certificate with a perfectly manicured nail. "It's in your name, registered to your home address, paid for with your personal card. Legally, the brand identity Elysian Threads, the name, the logo, everything associated with it, is your personal intellectual property. They are currently operating a business using your licensed asset without a contract or compensation." She let that sink in before continuing. "You don't just have leverage, Evelyn, you own the entire brand. Without it, their successful boutique is just a generic clothing store with 4 walls and a rack of dresses." We spent the next hour mapping out a strategy. Ms. Albright's advice was clear. Don't be emotional, be professional. This was a business dispute, and we would treat it as such. The goal wasn't just revenge, it was restitution. She advised me to gather every last piece of evidence I could find, emails, text messages, financial records, to build an unassailable case for my contributions, both financial and professional. For the next week, I was a woman on a mission. I combed through years of digital records, my old laptop humming as I compiled a comprehensive dossier. I created a timeline of my work, complete with links to the website pages I'd built, screenshots of the social media campaigns I'd run, and performance analytics showing the growth I had driven. I put together a detailed financial summary, tracking my initial investment and calculating the value of my 2 years of unpaid labor based on my previous industry salary. The final number was staggering. As I worked, my anger solidified into a cold, hard resolve. This was no longer just about the money or the broken promise. It was about my professional worth. Isabelle and Marcus had tried to erase my role, to reduce 2 years of my life's work to a footnote. This dossier was my rebuttal. It was the story of the business they had tried to silence. The hardest part was finding an old text exchange with Izzy from the week I quit my job. Her messages were full of excitement and gratitude. "I can't believe you're really doing this, Evie. We're going to be amazing. Don't worry about the money, we're partners. 50-50, pinky swear." Reading those words now felt like a punch to the gut, but I saved the screenshots. They were proof of intent, a clear record of the promise my sister had chosen to forget. By the end of the week, I had a thick binder and a password-protected digital folder filled with irrefutable proof. I met with Ms. Albright again and walked her through it. She nodded slowly, a thin smile on her lips. "Excellent," she said. "They've left you with nothing in writing to prove you were an owner, but they also have nothing in writing to prove you were. All they have is their word against yours, and you," she said, tapping the thick binder, "have this. Now it's time to arrange a meeting." The plan was set. I wasn't going to go in yelling or crying. I was going to walk in as the person I had always been for the business, the strategist, the professional, the one who had all the data. They had fired the employee, but they were about to meet the owner. Armed with my binder of evidence and Ms. Albright's strategic guidance, I made the call. I didn't phone Isabelle directly. I sent a formal email requesting a final severance meeting to discuss the terms of my departure. I copied Marcus on the email to ensure he would be there. I wanted them both in the room. They agreed to meet me at the boutique after closing time a few days later. Walking back into that space felt surreal. The soft lighting, the carefully arranged displays, the scent of potpourri, it was all so familiar, yet it felt like a lifetime ago. Isabelle and Marcus were waiting for me, seated at the small table near the front window where we used to have coffee and plan our days. They both wore expressions of mild annoyance, as if this meeting were an inconvenient chore. They clearly expected me to plead for my job back, or perhaps argue over the paltry sum in the severance envelope I still hadn't opened. "Evelyn," Isabelle said, breaking the silence, "let's make this quick, we're very busy." "I'm sure you are," I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. I sat down opposite them and placed my binder on the table with a soft thud. "I won't take up too much of your time. I'm here to discuss a fair resolution." Marcus leaned forward, a condescending smile playing on his lips. "Evelyn, the severance we offered is more than generous for an employee with your tenure. There's really nothing to discuss." "I'm not here to discuss the severance," I said calmly, meeting his gaze. "I'm here to discuss the return of my initial $60,000 and dollar investment." Isabelle's eyes widened slightly. Marcus, however, let out a short, dismissive laugh. "An investment? That's not what it was. It was a contribution, a risk you took. Sometimes risks don't pay off. That's business." "I see," I said, my heart pounding in my chest. This was the moment. I opened the binder to the first tab. "In that case, let's move on to a different topic." I slowly and deliberately slid a single piece of paper across the table toward them. It was a crisp, clean copy of the official trademark certificate for Elysian Threads. Isabelle picked it up, her brow furrowed in confusion. "What is this?" Marcus leaned over to look at it, his smug expression faltering for the first time. He read the document, then read it again, his face paling slightly. "That," I said, my voice perfectly level, "is the legal certificate of registration for the brand name of this boutique. As you can see, it lists me, Evelyn Reed, as the sole proprietor of all associated intellectual property. The name, the logo, everything." I let the silence stretch, allowing the weight of my words to land. Isabelle looked from the paper to me, her mouth slightly agape. I don't understand. This has to be a mistake." "It's no mistake, Izzy," I said, using her nickname to remind her of who I was. "Do you remember that first week? When you were sewing and I was handling all the boring paperwork? I registered the brand under my name to protect it before we had the money for a lawyer. It was supposed to be temporary, but we never transferred it. You're operating a business under a brand name that legally belongs to me." Marcus finally found his voice, though it was sharp with panic. "This is ridiculous. It's a trick. You can't do this. The LLC owns the business." "The LLC owns the inventory and the lease, Marcus," I countered, my confidence growing as his composure crumbled. "But the name on the door, the website domain people type in, the Instagram handle your customers follow, that's all mine. And you have been using it without a licensing agreement, without my permission, and certainly without compensating me for it." Isabelle looked completely lost, turning to Marcus for an answer. "Is this true?" His face was a mask of fury. He glared at me, his slick veneer completely gone. "She's trying to blackmail us, Izzy. She's being vindictive because she was fired." "I'm not being vindictive," I said, my voice as cold as ice. "I'm being a businesswoman, you taught me that, so let's discuss this as a business matter. We can talk about the sale of the brand. I'm willing to be reasonable. For a price, of course." The mask of civility had been shattered. Isabelle stared at me, her eyes filled with a dawning horror, not at what I was doing, but at the monumental oversight they had made. Marcus was sputtering, making empty threats about lawyers and lawsuits. His poorly executed blustering was the greatest confirmation of all. He was a fraud who had been caught, and he had no idea what to do. The power in the room had shifted entirely, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could finally breathe. The aftermath of my revelation was chaotic. Marcus, having lost his composure, quickly shifted tactics from empty threats to desperate manipulation. He turned to Isabelle, his voice dripping with faux concern. "Izzy, see? This is what she's really like," he said, gesturing toward me as if I were a venomous snake. "I warned you she couldn't be trusted. She was planning this all along, just waiting for a chance to stab you in the back." Isabelle, pale and shaken, looked from his furious face to my calm one. She was caught in the middle, her loyalty being tested in a way she had never anticipated. A part of her was still under his spell. "Evelyn, this isn't right," she said, her voice trembling. "The boutique was my dream, my idea. The name was something I came up with." "You came up with the name, Izzy, and I made it legal," I responded gently but firmly. "I protected our idea. The paperwork doesn't lie." The meeting ended without a resolution. Marcus dragged Isabelle out of the boutique, promising that his lawyers would bury me. I knew he was bluffing. He was a consultant, not a litigator, and any real lawyer would tell him they were in an impossible position. But his influence over my sister was still strong. In the days that followed, I received a series of increasingly frantic texts from Izzy, a mixture of pleading and anger. She accused me of trying to destroy her, of being jealous of her success. Each message was a painful reminder of how deeply Marcus had warped her perception of me. It was clear she was still defending him, still seeing me as the antagonist. Meanwhile, Ms. Albright wasn't idle. "His reaction was telling," she said over the phone. "A man that threatened is a man with something to hide." She began a discreet professional background check on Marcus. What she uncovered was worse than I could have imagined. Marcus had a pattern. He would attach himself to small, promising businesses, often run by creatives who were less focused on legal and financial details. He would gain their trust, advise them to restructure, and in the process, systematically push out original partners or co-founders, positioning himself to take a larger share of the profits. Ms. Albright found 2 other cases in different states where he had used nearly identical tactics. Both had resulted in messy legal battles, with the original partners claiming they had been defrauded. One case was still tied up in court. "He's not just a bad boyfriend, Ms. Reed," Ms. Albright told me. "He's a professional parasite." She acquired copies of the legal complaints filed against him in the other cases. The stories they told were chillingly familiar. Broken promises, manipulated financials, and partners left with nothing. This was the irrefutable proof I needed to break Marcus's spell over my sister for good. I knew a group confrontation wouldn't work. Marcus would just shout over the evidence and twist the narrative. I had to get to Isabelle alone. I texted her, my message simple and non-confrontational. "Izzy, I have something you need to see. Something that isn't about me or you, but about the person you're trusting. Meet me for coffee, please, as your sister." To my surprise, she agreed. We met at a neutral location, a small cafe far from the boutique. She arrived looking tired and stressed, her usual vibrant energy completely gone. She sat down with her arms crossed, her expression guarded. I didn't waste time with small talk. I pushed a folder across the table. "Before you say anything, just read this." Inside were the legal complaints against Marcus. I watched her as she read, her eyes scanning the pages. I saw her expression shift from defensiveness to confusion, and then to a slow, dawning horror. She was reading stories that mirrored our own, with terrifying precision. The language he'd used, the strategies he'd employed, it was all there, documented in sworn affidavits from his past victims. When she looked up from the last page, the anger and defensiveness in her eyes were gone, replaced by a devastating clarity. The spell was finally, irrevocably broken. "I didn't know," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. He told me, he said they were disgruntled employees, that they were making things up. He told you the same thing he was telling you about me, I said softly. Tears streamed down her face, tears of regret, of foolishness, of betrayal, not by me but by him. She saw him for what he was, a user who saw her dream not as something to support, but as an asset to be stripped. "What have I done?" she cried, covering her face with her hands. In that moment, seeing her so broken, my anger toward her began to soften, replaced by a familiar, sisterly pang of protectiveness. She had been foolish and weak, and she had hurt me terribly. But she had also been a victim of a practiced manipulator. "The first step," I said, my voice full of a resolve she now shared, "is we make it right." The boutique's one-year anniversary party was meant to be Isabelle's coronation. It was planned months in advance, a lavish affair to celebrate the success she and Marcus now claimed as entirely their own. It was the culmination of everything I had worked for, twisted into a painful spectacle. The local press had been invited, along with the city's top fashion influencers and our most loyal clients. For Marcus, it was the perfect stage to present himself as the brilliant businessman behind the brand. For Isabelle, it was supposed to be a night of triumph. Now, it was going to be a reckoning. Isabelle and I had spent the last few days working with Ms. Albright to draft a final, binding agreement. There was no more shouting, no more accusations. There was only a grim, quiet determination from my sister to undo the damage she had allowed. The night of the party, I arrived not as a guest, but as a ghost from the business's past. I was accompanied by Ms. Albright, who carried a slim leather briefcase. We didn't enter through the front, where champagne was flowing and music was playing. Isabelle met us at the back door and led us to the office, my old office, while the party raged on just a few feet away. Marcus was schmoozing on the showroom floor, a glass of champagne in hand, basking in the glow of a success he hadn't earned. Isabelle's plan was to pull him away for a private business matter just before she was scheduled to give her big speech. We sat in the cramped office, the muffled sounds of laughter and conversation filtering through the door. My heart hammered against my ribs. Isabelle was pale but resolute. 10 minutes later, the door opened and Marcus walked in, a triumphant smile on his face. The smile vanished the moment he saw me and Ms. Albright. "What is this?" he demanded, his eyes darting between. "Enos, Izzy, what are they doing here?" "They're here to finalize our business arrangement, Marcus," Isabelle said, her voice shaking but firm. Ms. Albright placed the briefcase on the desk and opened it, producing a thick document. "This is a binding buyout agreement," she said in a calm, authoritative tone. "It transfers all intellectual property rights for the brand Elysian Threads to the LLC in exchange for a one-time payment to my client, Ms. Evelyn Reed." She slid the document in front of him. "The payment amount," she continued, "is calculated to include the return of her initial $60,000 investment, back pay for 2 years of service at the industry standard rate for a marketing director, and a 25% share of the business's current valuation, reflecting her role as a co-founder." Marcus stared at the final number on the page and sputtered. "This is extortion. It's insane. We will never sign this." "The alternative," Ms. Albright said, her voice dropping to a steely quiet, "is that we walk out that door and I file a cease and desist order with the court first thing Monday morning. An injunction will be served, freezing your website and social media accounts. You'll be forced to stop using the name immediately. And then we will file a lawsuit for trademark infringement and fraudulent business practices." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. "I imagine the reporters and influencers enjoying your party right now would be very interested in that story. The tale of how a successful boutique was built on a stolen brand and a betrayed sister. I doubt Elysian Threads, or you, Mr. Thorne, would ever recover from that kind of publicity." Marcus was trapped. His face was a thunderous mask of rage. He looked at Isabelle, expecting her to side with him to fight back. But Isabelle stood her ground. She looked him directly in the eye, her voice filled with a quiet strength I hadn't heard in months. "It's over, Marcus," she said. "I know what you did, I know about the others." The color drained from his face. He knew he had lost. This was Isabelle's moment of truth. With the party, her reputation, and her entire future on the line, she made her choice. She picked up a pen from the desk, her hand trembling slightly, and signed the agreement with a firm, decisive stroke. She pushed the document toward Marcus. "Sign it," she ordered. Cornered, humiliated, and utterly defeated, he snatched the pen and scribbled his name. His dreams of coasting on my sister's talent and my hard work were over. Isabelle took a deep breath. "Now get out," she said, her voice low. "Get out of my boutique, get out of my life." He stared at her, then at me, his eyes filled with pure hatred. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the office, disappearing into the noise of a party that was no longer his. The moment the door clicked shut, Isabelle sank into the chair, the fight finally leaving her. The look she gave me was one of profound, heartbreaking remorse. Justice had been served, and the difficult work of healing was about to begin. The buyout was completed swiftly and silently in the weeks that followed. The substantial sum of money appeared in my bank account, a figure that represented not a windfall, but a hard-won reclamation of what was rightfully mine. True to her word, Isabelle cut Marcus out of her life completely. His name was removed from the business accounts, his belongings were packed into boxes, and his chapter in our lives was closed. The news of his departure was spun to the public as an amicable parting of ways, a quiet end to a toxic partnership that preserved the boutique's reputation. With Marcus gone, Isabelle and I began the slow, painful process of rebuilding our relationship. Our first few conversations were achingly difficult. She sat in my small apartment, the same one I'd kept while she was living a life funded by my sacrifices, and she cried. She apologized for her blindness, for her ambition, for allowing a manipulative man to turn her against her own family. "He made me feel like the most talented person in the world," she confessed, her voice thick with shame. "And he made me feel like you were holding me back, that your caution was a weakness. I wanted to believe him so badly that I ignored everything else." Forgiveness did not come easily. The wound was too deep, the betrayal too profound to be erased with simple words. But as I looked at my sister, stripped of her arrogance and filled with genuine remorse, I saw the Izzy I grew up with. The bond we shared, though severely damaged, was not entirely broken. We started with coffee, then dinners. We talked about everything except the boutique, rebuilding our sisterhood from the ground up on a new foundation of honesty and painful lessons learned. The money gave me freedom. For the first time in 2 years, I wasn't worried about finances. I could breathe, but I had no desire to return to the corporate world I'd left behind. My experience with Elysian Threads, as painful as it was, had ignited a passion for entrepreneurship. I had learned that I was more than just a good marketer, I was a builder. I decided to use my capital and my hard-won experience to start my own venture. I founded a marketing consultancy firm with a unique mission: to support creative, women-led startups. My goal was to provide them with the business acumen and strategic guidance they needed to thrive, but more importantly, to ensure they were protected. The first service I offered every client was a comprehensive legal and branding setup, making sure their partnerships were ironclad and their intellectual property was secure from day one. I was determined to help other women avoid the kind of predatory trap I had fallen into. My business grew quickly, my story resonating with a community of female founders who understood the unique challenges we faced. I became a protector, a strategist, and a mentor. About a year later, I received an invitation in the mail. It was for the second anniversary party of Elysian Threads. Tucked inside was a handwritten note from Isabelle. "It wouldn't be a celebration without my original partner," it read. I attended. The boutique was thriving, a testament to Izzy's undeniable creative talent. She had hired a proper business manager and had learned to trust her team. When she gave her speech that night, she thanked her staff and her customers. Then, she looked directly at me across the crowded room. "And I want to give a special thanks to my sister, Evelyn," she said, her voice clear and strong. "This business was born from a shared dream, and it was her strength, her vision, and her business savvy that built the foundation we all stand on today. I am eternally grateful for the lessons she taught me, both in business and in life." Tears welled in my eyes, but this time they were not tears of pain or betrayal. They were tears of peace. We had both lost something in that painful year, but we had both found something new in the wreckage. She had found humility and a new kind of strength, and I had found my true calling. Standing there, I felt a profound sense of vindication. I hadn't just gotten my money back. I had reclaimed my worth, rebuilt my life on my own terms, and finally, I was starting to get my sister back.